Morning and welcome to the webinar on the necessity for a just cause in effective workplace culture. I'm Sharon, Director of Events and Marketing at the Chamber. This morning, we have a rare opportunity to learn from two expert speakers, Nathan Woodrow and Luke Bobilek, also known as Bobby, from Ryde International. They will be sharing with us what is a just cause, what are the benefits of implementing it, and the strategies to implement it effectively. After their presentation, there will be a Q&A session, which I will be moderating, and I'll encourage all participants to please submit your questions in the Q&A function of the platform. And one last housekeeping rule, we'd like to request everyone to refrain from taking any screenshots during the webinar. We will be doing a LinkedIn post as always after the event, so feel free to like and repost. And without further ado, I will hand over the time to both Luke and Nathan. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having us on today. We're really excited to be speaking about this topic. It's one that's been really important for us as we continue to learn more, implement it, and work with different people, organisations on it as well. I'm actually going to throw over to Bobby for the first part of this presentation to step us through the first part. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Nathan. Good morning to everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you to Victor and Sharon and the team at the Chamber for having us, and welcome to all of our friends and colleagues and collaborators who are on the call. Before we start, just to pick up on a couple of things that Sharon mentioned right at the beginning, I guess we're a little bit different in Ryde, and that we're probably going to encourage people to approach their response to today a little bit differently. If you know someone that or you've told someone that you're on the webinar this morning, or you're going to be jumping on a webinar to learn more about this topic, one of the things we'd encourage you to do is to sit really quietly in whatever's spoken about today. If someone says to you, "How was it?" We'd love to challenge you to say, "I don't know yet," and take some time and really think about it for a few days before you respond to that question. And the second part of our challenge is not to respond on social media. Take some time, engage with the post, support the Chamber in their LinkedIn discussion by all means, but really sit in some of the discussions that we have today and be really thoughtful about what your response is to that question. When someone says to you, "How was it?" We'd really like to challenge people to say, "We don't know yet. We'd really like to think about it. We'd really like to learn more," and then to form an opinion or to start a conversation with a colleague. If we could go to the next slide, please. This is just coming up as an outline on the next slide. Is just an outline of what Victor and the team posted and Sharon and her team posted about what you can expect today. We just want to be really clear that this isn't a sales pitch. This isn't us trying to convince you of anything. This is a discussion, and there's no way in 40 minutes we can convince you or talk to you about all of the elements of a just cause, of purpose. It's simply not possible. So this is a real conversational piece today about what we're passionate about, what we do at Ryde, and some of the learning that we've captured along the way. Again, to really stress to you, this is not us trying to convince you, saying that you should be doing things a certain way. There are a million things that you'll be doing in your organisation that are as effective as what we do. This is about sharing, hopefully making you more curious to learn a little bit more about our approach and the approach of other people in this space. Next slide, please. One of the things that we do before we work with anyone is try and reduce the pressure of cognitive load on people. And we do that by setting some really strict language protocols. Now, these don't necessarily apply to our discussion today, but we've got them there as an example. And that is one of the things that is really important to us, is the idea that people understand the currency in which we're going to communicate. We're going to deal in a currency of truth. And we talk about currency because it's exchanged. It's interchanged between people when we speak. And we think that by establishing a platform of truth, which is evidence-driven, that's what we talk about when we talk about truth in discussion and dialogue, that we eliminate some of the risk of cognitive load for people, of cognitive overload and stress, because people have a clear understanding and expectation about how we'll deal with each other. And I guess that's what you can expect from us today, that we'll try very hard to be evidence-driven. We'll try very hard to be as honest as we can about our experience in our company, but we'll also try very hard, and we won't always get it right, to eliminate some of the language that we don't encourage at Ryde. So talking about good, bad, great, liking or disliking, thinking or I reckon, this language we try really hard not to use. We try really hard not to adopt, because all of those things have strong elements of subjectivity. So we talk about being effective or ineffective and how we can measure those things. And that's the way that we'd try and hold each other to account today through this discussion. The other piece I would just add to that is there's some really interesting data at the moment. I think it came out of the Harvard Business Review just recently that said that 30% of employees say that they're frustrated by unclear communication from their bosses. So the effectiveness of our communication is critical to cultural growth. And that's one of the points we'll try and make as we go. Next slide, please. Our learning intention for today for you guys is this. By the end of the webinar, we want people just to be curious enough to go and learn more and to start the conversation within your own organisation. Now, that organisation might be your team, it might be your full organisation, it might be your family. But we just want people to be curious enough to go and learn a little bit more about what we're talking about, whether that's by emailing us and having a conversation with us, whether that's starting a conversation with people that you know and trust, whether it's learning more by reading, engaging in online resources, whatever it happens to be. Our goal today is not to get you to buy something, do something, go somewhere. It's just to think and to talk to someone else about what we talk about today. Next slide, please. In order to do that, these are the questions we're going to try and answer. What is a just cause, as we refer to it? What are the benefits of implementing a just cause, or the risks of not implementing a just cause? And what does the process like for developing a just cause? So they're the things that we hope you have answers to by the time we're done today. Next slide, please. And just a reminder that slides and information will be available to people as we go through. A couple more things from me. The big ideas, there's 2 pages here of big ideas, and we're not going to speak to all of them. We can't possibly in the time that we've got. But what we've tried to get together is about 8 or 9 really central ideas that when we talk about cultural growth in our organisation, or we talk to other businesses about it, these are some of the recurring themes that keep coming up. And there's 2 that I just want to point to, or 3 that I want to point to really quickly. The first is that leadership is dangerous. When we push people away from the equilibrium that they know, from the practices that they know, people push back. There's some brilliant, and we'll refer to it right at the end of the session today, there's some brilliant work by Heifetz and Linsky in this very area, talking about the dangers of leadership. And imposing or introducing or growing cultural evolution in your organisation can be dangerous for us. We need to recognise that straight away. Top line outcomes drive bottom line results. If we care for our people will care about what happens to our organisation. Top line outcomes drive bottom line results. People will have heard organisations like Apple talk about this a lot. Care for people, care for purpose, care for values, and your bottom line results will take care of themselves. Now, it's not as simple as that, but there is a great connectivity. Next slide, please. And the third one I just want to mention quickly is the idea that busyness is an airborne contagion. Again, I think it was earlier this year, HBR published some research, it might have been a little bit earlier than that, that talked about the idea of workplaces, particularly coming out of COVID and being in and coming out of COVID, workplaces valuing the idea that people were busy as opposed to the idea that people were effective. And that was in workplaces, we were starting to hold up the idea that people were doing things as opposed to valuing what they were doing. Now, that's pretty dangerous for us in our organisations. That's really dangerous for us in our organisations. So our language, our just cause or our purpose piece is central to how we navigate that. And just to mention some things here that are more prevalent than they've ever been: false urgency, hurry sickness, sunset fatigue, all things that doctors, psychologists and specialists in this space are talking about as a result of us living in the attention economy. There are so many things designed for our workers, for us, to grab our attention on a daily basis. How do we navigate clearly? How do we help our people navigate through the attention economy? How do we help them navigate and stay clear on and engage with the work in our organisations to be as effective and productive as they possibly can? So Busyness is an airborne contagion. It's one of those things that gets into the air conditioning of our organisations. Someone says it on one floor, and before you know it, it floats through the air conditioning, and people have caught busyness all the way through your organisation, and that can be a really dangerous thing. Next slide, please, and the last one from me for a while. There's two activities or two tasks that we take really seriously when starting our work with people. Now, we're not going to do them today, but we'd love to talk to people about an essentials inventory, which is valuing the things that you value. What are you putting time and effort into? What are you putting attention to? And how does that reflect where you want to go? But the second is something that we call the it's okay to task. And this is really a critical thing. And I'm going to ask people just to do this just for 30 seconds or so. One of the things we ask people to do, whether it's personally in their practice, whether it's within their organisations, whether it's within their teams, and we do this with sporting teams quite often, is to ask the question, what has it been okay to do within your organisation? That is, what are the long-held cultural or operational norms that have become realities for people? Is it okay in your organisation to praise people when they're effective? Is it okay to come late to meetings? Is it okay to be sloppy with language? Is it okay to be on your mobile phone during a meeting or conversation? What are the practices that are okay to do? What are the things that have become cultural norms for you? And one of the things that we really try and encourage here is the idea that people do this objectively. We do it without a personal connectivity to whatever we're describing. Because if we're too subjective with this, we're not going to see what's really become a norm, what's really become a habit within our organisation, what's really become a reality for people. So we have to encourage real honesty in that dialogue and in those conversations so people can understand culturally what has become a norm for people. I'm just going to take 30 seconds and ask people quietly, please, to do that task. Just to think whether you write something down or not is entirely up to you. But what are the okay things to do within your organisation? It might be a place that you lead. It might be a team that you participate in. It might be the organisation that you help run on a leadership team. It might be the department that you work in. What's it okay to do? And Nath, we'll just give people 30 seconds and then throw to you, but if that's okay.
Absolutely. Perfect.
I'd encourage people to take a lot longer time to do that task. I'd encourage people to take that time with their colleagues. I'd really encourage people to take time to do that openly and honestly, because often these things that come up in these discussions are the roadblocks to cultural growth and evolution in our organisation. So before we can move into where we want to go, we have to understand where we are. So asking what it's okay to do, what it's become okay to do, is a really important question to getting somewhere along the way. Next slide, please. Nath, we'll go to you.
Absolutely. Perfect. So a big thing for us, especially when we're speaking about the just cause and how that links into workplace culture, how that links into our people and the work, the outcomes that come from that, is looking at the numbers and this piece that we've looked at, that we put together here, has been super interesting. But first, just wanted to mention that we were lucky enough this year to speak with a professor from the Harvard Business School, Teresa Marble, and we were able to ask and speak about the biggest misconception in the workplace, what we have when we're leading our people. And the biggest misconception was that we had to force our people to do effective work. And it was something we found very interesting to speak about, especially because of the work that we're doing within Ryde and with other people too. And to our standards, to Professor Marble's, and what the research tells us is forcing people to do effective work is not the answer at all. And what that does is actually that conversation and that research actually emphasizes the importance of implementing a just cause, purpose, values, targets, and not just leaders being clear on them, communicating what those things mean for their people as well. So when we think about that and then look to the numbers, we can see that the average wage in Singapore equates to approximately $39 an hour. And I mean, the hourly rate here, as written there, it's not the discussion, it's what the numbers are representing. And just down below that, pre-COVID, Forbes suggested that 29% of employees wasted 1 to 2 hours per week. 21% of employees wasted 2 to 5 hours, and 8% wasted 6 to 10. So on the right of the screen here, if we think of that and as an entire organization, and we go, there's 100 people wasting on average 5 hours per week at $39 per hour over the course of an entire working year, that's nearly $900,000 for the year we're paying people, that you'll be paying people not to work. And what we can see is that if the answer here is to force people to do good work, to do effective work, we're actually seeing people wasting time. And the answer there isn't for us to be forcing people, it's about creating that workplace culture. And how do we do that? It's by communicating and co-constructing a purpose, a value, a set of values and the targets that come from that, so people understand what they're contributing to. Because we know that when people see the work as meaningful and have that sense of purpose, it can foster a sense of autonomy within the workplace. And that's when that brings the well-being, a sense of a real engagement with the work rather than a disengagement. And able to, by doing that, the work then becomes more effective. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add on to that, Bobby.
Just really quickly, Nate, that idea that when we talk about people wasting, we've used that term quite purposely because the research from Forbes actually talks about people being actively disengaged. That is, people sitting at their desk, searching social media sites, researching their next holiday, something of that. It's not the time that people take having lunch, going to the bathroom, doing those things. It's actually time that's designated for them to be actively engaged in their work when they're actively disengaged from their work. So just a really important distinction there to make too.
Absolutely. If we can go to the next slide, please. Doesn't it make sense to drive cultural growth, values, purpose inside of our organization? And something we've found in these types of conversations about the just cause, about purpose, values, and how they link to targets, how they link to our people, all those sorts of things, is they can be seen as just a nice conversation to be having, one that's needed to be had because someone's been told to, something along those lines, and that's not what it is at all. It's what we see it as is a fundamental business practice. And when we understand how all of these things come together, as I said in the previous slide, how we can shift from purpose, values, and how that impacts our people, and our people impact our outcomes that are driven based on our values, but also financial outcomes are driven because that's what our people, if we're directly impacting our people, then our financial outcomes are going to improve as well. So when our leadership is effective, we see tangible outcomes. Next slide, please. So another at Ryde, while we're working on these things for ourselves, we're always wanting to go back to the data and understand what's happening in different examples, and for us to be able to relate it back to ourselves and understand what's happening at Ryde as well, and when we work with other people. And we know a just cause for us acts as a compass for where we're headed, for us to know where we're headed, for our people to know where they are. And it holds everything together. We have a place that we can go back to always understand what we believe in, what we do, and how we're getting there. And that's not obviously just for us as leaders, but for the company as a whole. And it allows us to be able to diversify as well. When this piece we found very interesting, especially if we go back to the point made in the previous slide about it being just a nice conversation to be having, what we believe and what we know through our own experience is that it creates tangible outcomes. There's real things that happen when we implement these practices into an organization. And a Harvard study was done on over 200 companies and the outcome from the study, they saw in strong culture, there was a net increase of 765% of income over 10 years. And we're not saying at all that by doing what we're talking about today, you'll see the exact same result. But looking at that number and that study, we couldn't ignore it, because there's too much there there's too much evidence there to go, well, there's clearly an alignment, there's clearly linkages between when we improve when we get clear on purpose, when our people do as well, we see tangible outcomes, and in a range of different ways. And on the right of the screen, when we see the top 3 components that people within an organization refer to as a good job, it comes down to enjoyable day-to-day work, stable and predictable pay, and a sense of purpose. And that third one, the sense of purpose, as I mentioned, can, from conversations we've had, from experiences we've had, can certainly be left behind. And I mean, just the first point, looking at only 49% of employees felt that they had all of these things. And I think that's that on its own shows there can be real improvement in this area. And it's why we're so passionate about it as well.
Nathan, I might just jump in quickly if I can, but I think this is a really good example of the stuff that we can't possibly cover today. So we've tried really hard to include in the notes some data on this slide, on the next slide, that really speaks to the evidence around purpose and value. But just looking at that first on the left-hand column there, the work by Coyle talks about safety, vulnerability, and purpose in real detail in his work around culture. We can't possibly cover those things to get to that 765 over 10 years, for example. And as Nate said, we can't guarantee that people will capture those types of results. This is exactly the stuff we'd love people to be curious about, and to go and to think more and debate more and argue more about with their colleagues and with their peers. Particularly the work, I'll just make a point there, particularly the work around cultural vulnerability. Vulnerability is one of those words that I believe, and I think Nate shares my belief, that has really been morphed, has been devalued and eroded through social media and other platforms. And that vulnerability doesn't mean necessarily what it's come to mean. And when we talk about cultural vulnerability, we're actually talking about recognising the value and reality of the uncertainties in our people, in our relationships, and in the work. That's how we capture it. So, the really deep dive around those things and being really perceptive in terms of the research and the writing around this piece is really central to you being able to debate, to be curious, and to learn and know more about it.
Absolutely. Beautiful. If we could go next slide, thank you. On this one, there was a point that when Bobby and I were speaking about it, we had a fantastic conversation. It was something I was really intrigued by, which was there was a stark purpose gap exists between upper management and the front line. And 85% of executives and upper management agree that they can live their purpose in their day-to-day work. 85% of frontline managers and frontline employees disagree or are unsure whether they can live their purpose in their day-to-day work. And we can see that even at upper management, even at the leadership kind of level, so people can believe they can live their purpose, and they're the ones we'd imagine are constructing the vision, the purpose, and the values for the company. And then when we go to the frontline managers and frontline employees, most of them, 85%, don't agree that they can live the purpose. And in there lies that there's a communication, there has to be a communication gap in between. Even when we set our purpose, even when we know our values and targets, the most important piece is for all of our people to understand them as well, because they're the ones that are directly impacted by it. And then they're the ones that have the most impact when they're doing their work inside the organization. And I know a big part for us, when we have become really clear on our purpose, values, targets, and when we speak with our team, when we speak with anyone that comes in, we're able to walk through what purpose means, what the values mean, and what strategies they can use, so then they can live purpose through their day while they're working with us at Ryde. Different, whether it's in an interaction, when they're doing different parts of their whatever job they're doing, what does the way that we work at Ryde, what does that mean for them, and how can they work toward achieving our purpose and contribute to it as well. So something really interesting that we've found in that piece there.
And I think, Nate, the other thing there, just in terms of, we recognise that there's some contradictory numbers here, and that's exactly the reason we've put so much stuff in here, to prove a point and to demonstrate a pattern that there isn't buy-in holistically from staff, from workforce, in what is set for them as the vision, and that we don't see behaviours aligning with that vision, whether it's by leadership or staff, because they're not clear about what they are. So across all of that data, even though there are some numbers that look a little bit different, and we're really aware of that, there's a really strong pattern. There's a really strong narrative that says we don't get what you're telling us. We don't even necessarily believe what you're telling us, and we don't see you as the leadership behaving in a way all of the time, or us behaving in a way all the time that aligns with that purpose.
Absolutely. Great. Perfect. So, just cause. When we speak about just cause and we speak about what we just have as well, it can be maybe easy to assume that there's one way to do it, or you can grab the way someone else has done it and put it straight into your organization or your team, and that's just not the case. And we know that a lot of organizations will already have some kind of set of principles, purpose, values, and mission statement, something of that nature. What we're talking about is bringing it all together for people to understand what it is, how it can be brought to life, and what that means for your people, and what outcomes then that can create. As put quite simply, Bobby.
Cultural growth doesn't have to mean that it's complex. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about it being effective. And when Nath makes the point that people will already be doing things, that's really true. Some of you will be conducting audits in terms of effectiveness. Some of you will be asking your people to journal in particular ways. Some of you will be greeting your people at the door when they walk into the office in the morning, which has a tangible impact for those people that aren't. There's some really good data around the impact that has on engagement and in decreasing disruptive behaviours. So there are lots of things that will be going on at the moment that are already contributing to building your culture. Really important that you hang on to those and just try and make those really tangible pieces even more visible and three-dimensional in your organisation.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Next slide, please. What do you do? So a question we found a lot of value in asking ourselves, and when we ask other people as well. And it's interesting, the response, we see quite a common theme in responses we get when we ask the question, and it's always not quite sure how to answer it, that maybe the language isn't there yet. And we actually really love that people don't rush to the language when we do ask the question, because we know how important the language can be, because that's what it's all a lot of it is about, is we want the language to hold the power so people can understand and they can actually live by it. And when I was first asked, what do you do? I had a very similar reaction, and it really made me think about at Ryde, your mind very quickly goes to a product, or can go to a product or a service that you do, and that's not what it's about at all. It's what does your company believe in, and what are you working toward, and what are you actually contributing to as an organization. And there was a few activities we did to test when we were starting to become clear on Ryde's purpose and values and targets. And it was to speak to people that we didn't actually know, and for me to explain what Ryde does. And that was a really interesting way to test this. But what it did was made me see if I believed in what we do at Ryde. Because if I wasn't going to believe in it, if I wasn't confident enough in speaking about Ryde to someone I didn't know, then I can't expect someone coming into the organisation to feel confident in the purpose that we're serving, which is Ryde is designed to resist the notion that growing up has to mean growing old. At no age do we believe you should ever stop being curious or stop doing the things you're passionate about. And this goes right through from all of our 7 business units. We never want, when we work with a person on these sorts of things in an organisation, we don't want an organisation to become stale and stagnant because they haven't been able to pay attention to their purpose, values and targets that drive them culturally as an organisation. We want people to be able to resist that notion and to grow up and to not grow old though. So it's while it can seem quite a simple question, it's one that we pose to a lot of people, and it's one to definitely take some time thinking on and sketching out a range of different answers, and they'll be too long a lot of the time, and you'll refine it and understand what they mean. But what do you do as an organisation? Such an important question that we found.
And a really great sticky note task for people. Give your leadership team Post-it notes, hand them one each, give them a moment's silence and ask that question, what do we do here? And see the answers that come back. And if you've got 12 people around the table, the 12 answers, your goal should be that the 12 answers are the same. It was lovely for us to work with an organisation just last week that had 100% of people around the table provide the same answer, which was really great. But more often than not, we work with organisations that start their journey by having 12 different answers. And that's a really common place to be, but it's also a really exciting place to be.
Absolutely. So we've added in a few different questions from John Coleman to really help with this process. And even just looking at that first one while we're here is, what is your company's core central purpose and how does it manifest? So how does it come to life? That's a really important piece, is understanding what's the purpose, and then what are we doing, as I spoke about a little bit ago, is what strategies are in place, or how do we understand it, of how we're bringing that purpose to life, and how do our people understand that we're bringing it to life as well.
Nathan, I might just give a really quick example. I'm mindful of the time that we've got, but a really quick example in that first one when it talks about manifesting. So one of the things that we have at Ryde and we're really proud of is the idea of our stakeholder engagement framework, and that is that whether you're working with us in Ryde Design, which is our design and manufacturing and merchandising label, or whether it's Ryde Clothing, whether it's Ryde Growth, which is our business improvement area, there are a set of standards that we ask our staff to really adhere to. And when we all sat around the table and talked about what that should be, the consensus was that it manifests in an idea that people feel like they've sat and had a really constructive cup of coffee with someone from Ryde, that you've had that conversation with someone that you felt supported, you felt hard empathy, you felt honesty, but you've also felt an exchange that's taken place. So putting some scaffolding around how it manifests and what people should expect to feel in your interactions is really central to purpose and for us, just cause. And asking people and tracking those things. How are people leaving conversations, interactions, projects with us feeling about the time that they've spent, not just in the product or the service, as Nate said, but in terms of their engagement with us too.
Perfect. Absolutely. So we've added in a list of criteria from Simon Sinek, and we've added a fourth in from us as well that we really believe in. And as we look at these things, holds us to a higher standard, willingness to sacrifice for it. They're great guidelines for us to understand an effective just cause and what that looks like, and how our people can understand it too. First, how can we understand it, and how can our people understand it as well? And we see when we were able to, especially when we're able to let the just cause ooze out of us, when that's why we put this in there. We find it so important. Even when we understand 1, 2, and 3, what language do we incorporate into it? How does it ooze out of us? How can we share it with our people? Because when we believe in our just cause, we can understand the opportunity that can come from it. It doesn't limit us down to these set 3 things. Now that we understand who we are and where we're headed, we're able to identify opportunity in a whole different way, because everyone is all on the same page with what we do and how we can get to where we're going. And there's so many different creative ways we can do that. But first, we all need to be on the same page with where we can head, where we can go with what we're doing. Next slide, please. Perfect. So the fantastic illustration from Bobby. He's chief designer for Ryde Design. So we're looking at the just cause as a funnel. And if you're doing something that doesn't fit through your funnel, why are you doing it? Simple as that.
And I think that's the piece, Nate, that so many people cast to the side. We'll just make this one decision. We'll just take this one course of action. We'll just hire this one person, even though we know it doesn't fit. And that's okay. Your leadership can do that at any stage. It's their company to run. But keeping in mind that when you start making those decisions to step outside your just cause, that you have to wear whatever the ramifications are of stepping away from what you believe in. For us, it's probably a really good time, Nate, just to mention quickly for us the impact calculator. So when we do our annual report at the end of each year, we work through our financials, absolutely, as we have to and we want to, but also we have an impact calculator that gives us an aggregated score for the year. And our impact calculator measures 8 different criteria. Those 8 criteria, only one is financial. The rest relate directly back to our just cause. It's all data driven. It's all captured in terms of the information that we can harvest through the work we've done for the year, and we'll end up getting a score each year. Now, we're really fortunate and we've worked tremendously hard to make sure that impact score every year that we generate has improved year on year. Our mid-year score this year looks like it's going to be our best yet, which we're really proud of. But the reason we're able to make those advancements, we believe, is because we funnel everything through our just cause. And if it doesn't align with our just cause, Nath has been really disciplined. We all have been really disciplined about not doing things that might be appealing at a time. They might have great financial outcomes at a time, but if they don't fit with where we're going and what we've committed to, we've been really disciplined about putting them to the side, not necessarily saying no, but saying not now, because we're committed to the vision that we've got and we know that it's showing growth and dividends for us. So really important for people to understand that there are ways, tangible ways to measure your effectiveness in your just cause through the funnel.
Absolutely. And as Bobby said, there's been plenty of opportunities that we've had real discussions about as we've put them through the filter, and they when we chose not to do them, we've also recognised that by doing them, there's really potential. It could hurt us more long term than reward us in the short term, in terms of, especially when we look at our messaging, when our messaging strategy is directly aligned with our just cause, and we do something that's not aligned with who we are, it's not only impacting us and our team, it's also our community as well. Next slide, please. So a case study, we look at Nike, obviously a brilliant case study to look at. And obviously in their mission statement, in all the work they do around these things, it's, Nike isn't talking about we sell shoes, we sell sporting equipment, and not even we're passionate about sport. They're talking about a service to their community. And when all of them are understanding this, or if they didn't have this, how on earth are you going to know how you service your community? Then that's when we believe it just becomes about selling shoes. When we put in the work to understand who we are and what we do and who we're doing this for and who are our people, how are they contributing to this as well, we're able to find that sense of purpose and for our outcomes to be improved as well.
And that notion of being of service to their community. So Nike serving their community, being of service by providing opportunities for everyone with a body to be an athlete, takes into consideration their purpose to unite the world through a healthy planet, active communities, and equal playing field by being of service, by delivering a service to their community that's critical.
Absolutely. And to link this back to the funnel, without any of this, what's their funnel as well? So, very interesting. Next slide, please. Right. So still on Nike, a video that we love sharing, and we think it's such a effective example for being clear on just cause and purpose and how that can visually be communicated and to storytell it with their community as well. If we can, we're able to play the video.
If Nate, given that we're a little short on time, I wonder if we just encourage people to check that when they get their notes.
Perfect. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we said, we see it as such a fantastic example, not only in the purpose space, but as we move on, and obviously we're not going to be able to speak about it today, but the messaging strategy, how you can storytell who you are, is such an effective example for that. Amazing. If we can go to the next slide, please. Awesome. So we've included a few more examples from different companies on their own purpose statements, mission statements, whatever you like to call them. What we find really interesting, and we'll just go to the first one: Google to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Google isn't saying making things searchable on the internet or to create a search engine. Again, it's about service to their community. And as we go down the list, there's a very clear theme in that service as well. And for companies that have such a large impact, it's hard not to ignore that. So we found those examples
I think to Nathan, it speaks to that point you made earlier about the idea that there isn't one way to do this. That Google's just cause, or whatever the language is that they will use at Google, is different from Walmart's, is different from MIT's, is different from Nike's, is different from Ryde's. And we're encouraging people not to ignore your value statements, your purpose statements, whatever it is, your mission statement, whatever it is you've already compiled. What we're challenging people to think about today is the idea of how do you bring that to life now? So for Google, if it's about organising the world's information, making it universally accessible and useful, what are they saying to their people to make that three-dimensional, for allowing people to really engage with that process and with that notion? We're not suggesting for a moment that people don't have guiding strategic principles. Of course you will. It's about how to grow those things and how to allow people to be a part of them in a really tangible way.
Absolutely. Next slide. So now we've included an example for us that sits on our company website, our Ryde International website, and we've chosen to, this is a piece we've written for us to capture who we are, what we do, and why we do it from our just cause as well. And we've made it accessible for ourselves, for our people inside of Ryde, and for the community, because we found it important for everyone to understand who we are, what we do, and why.
On that next slide, Nath, if we can.
Next slide, yes. Great. Thank you.
That's probably a really important point for people as well, that your just cause shouldn't look like this. Your just cause should look like your just cause. And however people want to frame it, however people want to capture it, that's for you and for your people to organise and to communicate to message to your organisation. For us, this is ours. It's organic. We can tell you how each of those parts plays a role in what we do, not just in being on a page, and how it informs our design, our customer service, our business improvement, all of those areas. So there are the dimensional parts to it. But again, we're not encouraging people to have something that looks like this. I don't think, Nath, we're encouraging people to have their own, right?
Absolutely. And another important piece is evolving and refining it as we go as well, and co-constructing it with whoever it is that needs to be in on that conversation as well. But absolutely, there's what we know is there's definitely not a right way to do it. It's about is it effective? As we always say, can people understand it, and what tangible outcomes are coming from it?
So if we go to the last slide, and we're just about ready to wrap up, just a really quick note from us that we started to signal right at the start of the presentation, and that is, in the attention economy, language has been morphed and manipulated. Words like intentional, purpose, gratitude, priority mean different things to what they used to mean. And if we're to get clarity around purpose, if we're to get to build a just cause within our organisation, language is subject to trust. So we have to be really, particularly those people I would suggest that work in educational institutions, we have to be really committed to that notion that language is being eroded. How do we work against that? Priorities is one that we talk about a lot in our organisation, and that is the word priority refers to a singular focus. And when people have pluralised priority into priorities, it's not actually a function that our brain can navigate. So we have to think about how we do that when we talk about the 5 priorities for your company. Well, is that achievable to start with? And that detailed level of language, some people would argue, is too much. We would argue it's the thing that actually helps us to reduce cognitive stress and overload, because it really drives clarity for people. What is the one thing that you're focused on doing? And if you asked anyone that works at Ryde, I would hope that they would tell you that we're a moments and storytelling company, and we resist the notion that growing up has to mean growing old. And they would tell you in their area what that looks like. The very last slide from us, please, is just to close this out nicely and to circle back to the work of Heifetz and Linsky. If people haven't read Leadership on the Line, we believe everyone should 100 times. We believe it to be the seminal text in all leadership matters. And just to round this out, is probably the most comprehensive notion from these two thinkers. And they say, to lead is to live dangerously, because when leadership counts, when you lead people through difficult change, you challenge what people hold dear, their daily habits, tools, loyalties, and ways of thinking, with nothing more to offer perhaps than a possibility. And we think that's exactly the right fit for this discussion about growing a just cause, for growing purpose, for making it 3-dimensional. People will push back, and they'll push back in really creative ways. That's why we have to have something more to offer them than just an idea. We have to have things that they can do in growing a just cause. We have to have calculators that we can measure and provide feedback for, and with and through, to be able to see and show people progress, and to give them autonomy and agency over the work. So as we go to the last slide, we'll share our email addresses. We'll circle back to that challenge that we laid for people right at the start, which is, please don't answer the question when you go back to your colleagues, when you push back from your desk in a few moments' time. Please don't say, gee, that was amazing, or that was rubbish. Think about it. Take some time to think and say, I don't know yet. I don't know enough yet. I'd like to learn more about an impact calculator, or how to compose a just cause, or why sustainability is critical to our purpose, or whatever it happens to be. I'd like to give people a post-it note and ask whether everyone in our organisation shares our belief around what it is we actually do. Do those things first, and then we'd love to start a conversation with you. We'd love to hear more from you. We'd love you to engage, certainly, with the Chamber's LinkedIn account and any posts that they share. But please do it in in a quiet way, which replicates the thought and the dedication to growing something in your organisation, which we think is really critical. So, Nath, a big thank you from us, I guess.
Absolutely, a massive thank you. It's something we're very passionate about, and it means a lot for everyone here that's made the time to jump on and be curious. Absolutely.
Sorry, Sharon, we're over time. Sorry.
No problem at all. Thank you so much, Bobby and Ethan, for the very insightful presentation. So now we can quickly move on to the Q&A session. And again, I'd like to encourage our participants to please submit the questions if they have any in the Q&A function of the Zoom platform. But as moderator, I think I can kick off the session with a couple of questions after listening to your presentation. So I think you dedicated a lot of time talking about crafting the purpose statement for an organization and how important it is. Can the purpose change along the way? And if so, how can organizations manage that change?
I
would say,
Peter, yeah.
As I finish off, and I'll throw to Bobby for this one as well, is about refining it and it evolving over time as we become clear, and as always, the organisation is always going to be evolving. And we spoke about this not too long ago, about co-constructing and what the strategy is as time goes on for which people need to be around the table for which teams, as we're crafting values and purpose and refining those things as we evolve as an organization. So to handle the change, my answer would be about the co-constructing of the people that need to be in on that conversation, and how is that being communicated throughout the entire organization. For you to add on to that one, Bobby.
I don't think that it should. I think that it must change. When we're talking about cultural maturity, which is a phrase we use a lot, as organisations, as individuals and organisations reach a point, of cultural maturity, we would expect that their habits change, and it's not necessarily, and their behaviours change most certainly, and that's going to force a change in your just cause. It may not force a change in that overarching statement. It may not be that Google's statement changes or Nike's statement change in terms of what they're trying to achieve, but it will be that the process, that the values, that the pieces underneath that change, and it might be that that purpose changes. Absolutely. One of the things I would suggest is, I know we've got some of our friends and colleagues on the call that work in educational institutions, particularly universities and international schools. One of the things that we see from highly culturally mature organisations in that sector is the engagement of students in selection of staff members, for example, and the selection of curriculum. We see highly mature organisations, schools and universities allowing senior students to play a role in the selection, the interview and the selection of principals in some instances, given that it's their organisation. So is that something that you would start with? I would suggest not. Is it something that as you become more culturally mature, as a practice, as a behaviour, as a habit you embed? Absolutely, which would mean that the documentation you use to capture these things probably does have to change over time.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions come in, but just one more from me before we look at those that have been submitted. You also talked about the communication gap and the purpose gap experienced by some companies. So how can they actively try and narrow or close that gap?
Sharon, sorry, can I just get you asked that again? That dropped out for a second.
Oh, sure. So you mentioned about communication gap and purpose gap in your presentation earlier. How can companies effectively narrow or close that gap?
Nathan, you want me to go first and then jump in, bud?
Absolutely, that'd be great.
The first thing I would say, Sharon, is the idea that the communication protocols are critical. So think about assembling a new team. Before you deal with your purpose, before you deal with your just cause, before you deal with product, how are you going to talk to each other? What are the standards that we expect in terms of how we're going to communicate? Because if there's not a platform for what effective communication looks like, how will you know when you've achieved it? I think that's a really critical piece. What are the expectations and around how I'm going to speak to you and how you're going to endeavour to hear me? That, for me, that should be the starting point for every organisation in everything they do. Do we know how we expect to talk to each other and hear each other? The second, and I'll let Nate talk about this, for me though, is really simply, not simply, it's incredibly hard to do, is the co-construction. People achieve autonomy and agency when they're part of the process. And these things, a just cause can't be forced on people, as Teresa Amabile would tell us. They have to be part of the process, Nate. Is that right?
Absolutely. I would just say again about the co-construction and autonomy. I mean, closing that gap means that more people believe in the just cause. That means that more people believe they can live the purpose. So it's the direct communication and co-construction, as you said, maybe sounds simple, but those things need to happen for people to believe and understand in the just cause, as I was saying a little bit ago as well, about, if as a leader we're not fully believing in it, how can our people fully believe they can live it as well?
Thank you so much. So looking at the first question submitted by Shirley, it is always easy to think about just cause when doing big projects or at strategy sessions. How do we ensure that we be mindful of the just cause in small decisions we make in day-to-day operations, that we do not go against the grain of just cause and gradually in small unseen ways erode or dilute the purpose of the organization?
That's such a, Shirley, thank you. That's such an impactful question. And it has a really practical answer. And that is, if things, and we're going to circle back here to Nathan's point again, if things are co-constructed and people have a sense of agency, that increases what the data would tell us and the research would tell us. That has an impact on engagement and has an impact on well-being. It means that our people are around the work more because it's their work. What we know that when we increase this sense of agency and autonomy and engagement is that we see other areas decrease in our organisation. And these are some of the measurables for us in our companies. That is that half work and rework decline. We see people accessing leave balances declining, for example, because people are healthier in terms of their engagement, their well-being holistically. So oddly enough, the answer to that question is actually around, how do we live it out in every decision that we make? The answer is about pastoral care. That's my position. And Nath might have a different answer, but pastoral care is us holistically looking after our people physically, emotionally, psychologically, so they can stay healthy and they can stay involved in the process. We won't have to remind people what we do if they've constructed it. And we won't have to remind people to do it if they're around the work a lot. So there are some really practical answers in terms of how do we remind people to stay on task with these things, keep them healthy and engaged. And for us, our checking point as leaders is to not micromanage. It's to not do the work. Heifetz and Linsky talk about the difference between a technical fix and an adaptive change. It's for us as leaders to stop doing and applying technical fixes, to let people do the work, and for us to focus on the process of adaptive change, which is reminding people to use the filter. And this is something that Nathan does to extraordinary effect for us at Ryde. The question from him that I hear on a daily basis is, does that go through the filter? Does that align with our just cause? No? Well, we're not doing it. We just need to remind people in really tangible ways, and they'll do the work. But our job is not always to apply a technical fix, is to focus on adaptive change. Nate, that was 17 answers to that question. I'm sorry.
It's what it should be. Absolutely. And I'll just add to that about it. It's always easy to think about the just cause in big projects or strategy sessions. And as I said right at the beginning about how sometimes this conversation can be seen as maybe a nice one to have, or we have it here and there where we think we need to, and definitely not assuming anything at all. But I know, is the just cause conversation only happening when there is certain projects or strategy sessions, or is there time being made for people to actually understand it? Because we understand it, probably the most impact is through all of those small decisions that we make, because there's so many made every single day. So,
and if I can, sorry, Sharon, just one more really practical thing again. I know we've got, as I said a couple of times, dear friends on the call from institutions there in Singapore. One of the things that you'll see, highly effective schools doing, for example, and I use this data because schools are so good at it, is meeting their students either at the front gate or the front door to their classroom every day. There's two things there. One is that improves engagement, decreases disruptive behaviours, but it's a chance and a reminder to for our students and for people that come into our organisations what we do here on that day. So those practical things. I mean, why can't our CEOs meet people in the morning as they come through the door? Why can't our chief operating officer be the first person they see that says to them when they come in, Sharon, what do we do here? What a lovely, practical, tangible way to start a day, which has a range of benefits for our organisation.
Thank you, Bobby. So you mentioned about just cause and managing people, taking care of their well-being. Are you able to talk a little bit about just cause, the link between just cause and social sustainability?
Yeah, it's a big area, obviously, and it's one that we're constantly engaged with people to think more about. I guess what I'd say is that it's an area that's evolving. COVID had a big impact in terms of well-being and social sustainability. The return post-COVID, if that's what we are, is having a big impact in that area as well. And there's something that I do think, Sharon's really interesting to talk about, and that's the idea of how do we combat some of those things that are new to us in managing our people. So the notion of false urgency, as an example, when have we created, or how have we created, a sense of false urgency in the workplace around tasks that can be completed quickly, as opposed to having a big impact and completed well? I think I listed examples before in terms of things like sunset fatigue, people working their way through their day, maximising their output, but getting home with nothing left to offer. How do we navigate all of these things now in the attention economy for our people, when every device that we have, every platform that we're on, is designed to capture our attention and to draw away from the work that we want our people committed to? So people in organisations have to make really clear decisions, practical, tangible decisions about how they do that. Whether it's implementing a technology Sabbath, a day where technology isn't used, where we reduce the impact of the attention economy. Whether it's we encouraging our people to journal in really particular ways. Whether it's we have down periods during the day where people are devoted to health and well-being, or less connectivity with technology, or whatever it happens to be. But my piece would be, and I'll be interested to see what Nate says here, to preserve people's well-being, we have to have practical outcomes, and they have to be unique to your organisation. There isn't going to be one thing that serves everyone, and that comes back to knowing our people really well and the context that we're in, I think, Nate.
Absolutely. And we often speak about leading the whole person, right? Understanding our people, putting a face on the data, and understand, it's while we've got these practices that we do, it's understanding how do they affect the people that we lead as well.
Thank you. Moving on to Derek's question. So it's about storytelling. So storytelling may be new to some traditional companies, especially in Singapore. In sharing this as a best practice, how do you encourage business leaders, owners to do so if they're not already doing that?
It's a really great question. Thank you, Derek, for asking that. And one of the things that we would suggest is again, putting language and defining around this notion of storytelling. So for us, the the most important factor in this discussion is defining the difference between storytelling and telling stories. And what we understand and what we believe in is that companies and leaders that storytell have something really important to say. They have a message that needs to be heard. People that tell stories, not so much. And that's why things like our language protocols are important. That's why things like co-construction of a just cause is important. That's why the sharing of dynamic and three-dimensional values are important. It's giving people a chance to storytell in a really meaningful way. What are the things about your company, for your company, to your community that people need to hear? And again, I'd circle back to Nike as an example. Because of the work Nike have done, they've become monumentally important in constructing social influence in areas like Black Lives Matter, the integration of women's sport, sport for people with a disability. They've used their influence to storytell at an incredibly effective level. But they've been really clear about that and how they go about that and the choices they've made. Nathan?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really understanding that storytelling is about, that's when we're getting people engaged in what we believe in, whether it's the outside community first learning about Ryde, or people inside of your organization that you want to learn about the organization as well. Is understanding storytelling, again, isn't one of those nice conversations to be having. It's about, this is how we can effectively communicate who we are and what we do with the people that work with us inside the organization, or they're in some way a part of the community.
Thank you. Okay, another question from Shirley. She really likes your statement that your just cause must ooze out of you. So the challenge is, how do we infect all our co-workers, our colleagues?
Do it with them. And you know, when we went through this process, we flew to a different city where we didn't know anyone. And my challenge to Nathan was to stop 100 people on the street and talk about Ryde. And that wasn't about rote learning. It wasn't about repetition. It was about getting comfortable storytelling. It was to see whether what we'd settled on oozed out of him. And every time Nathan was able to tell impactful, important stories, and it oozed out like it was the first time. But the answer, Shirley, to your question is do it with them. You know, go back to Professor Amabelé's work. We don't have to force people to do good work. People want to do good work. We don't have to force anything. We just have to give them the framework where they feel valued, where they see value in the work, and where they can be well cared for. And the work will be what you need it to be. But do it with them and let them play a part in it. Nath?
Absolutely. And
probably some bad flashbacks there from you walking down the street,
right? Absolutely. Is in working situations, I think something we've found incredibly valuable is when we're working on a project in any kind of business unit, and while we're going through it, relating back to what we do at Ryde and how this is contributing to what we do. So when we say do it with them, I also see that as if there's something happening in the day-to-day work or project, it's the reminding of this is what we do here, and the reason we're doing this is because we're serving on what we do at this company. And so being able to always come back to it in any part of what we do. And as we said before, I mean, that's the whole point of oozing out of you as well. If it oozes out of you, that's when someone else is most likely going to believe in it too.
Thank you. I'm mindful of the time, so we'll just take one last question that's from Chris. What are the biggest impediment challenge in the companies you work with, so that we can all reflect and avoid the same?
It's for me, it's probably the desire for people to think that it's done when the document's done. Cultural growth is about evolution. It's not about revolution. You evolve into a stronger organisation. It's not about getting to a point where you've got a strategy document, or you've been through a workshop, or you've spent a week with us at Ryde, and now you've got a just cause. That is absolutely not it. It's about understanding that this is a new diet. This is a new way of living. This is a new set of habits and routines for doing things, and that it has to be embedded. I think Shirley asked that question before. It's about embedding the choices that you make and the behaviours that you make. It's not about doing one or two things, or writing one or two things. It's about doing one or two things, and then doing three or four things. So the biggest blockage for me is that the misconception that people think culture changes by talking about culture. Culture changes by doing things differently, not by talking about things differently. Well, sorry, not just by talking about things differently. Nate, the last word for you, bud.
On that last question, or overall?
Well, probably Sharon. Should we wrap up and thank everyone?
Sure. Please do. You can answer the last question, and then wrap up the session.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I'd honestly, building on what Bobby said, just by thinking that, just by writing down on a piece of paper and having that complete, that it's done, then that's what we've seen a lot. That's obviously not an effective way to do this, because as we have said time and time again about communicating and storytelling, and all of your people understanding what we do here. So absolutely.
And I think people have to go through the angst of uncertainty and working through it. It can't just be a one-off thing that's done. You've got to take some time to really work through it.
For sure. Absolutely. Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much, both Nathan and Bobby, for your time and your sharing. It's been an eye-opener, I think, for all of us, and then to all our participants who join us online this morning. Again, I'd like to encourage everyone to visit our website, check out all the upcoming events. I think we have the slide, yes, coming up. Thank you. Do also reach out to us to give us your feedback and your thoughts. Thank you once again, and have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for jumping on. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.